I raised my daughter to believe that family means everything. I sacrificed my comfort, my savings, my own retirement plans, all so she and her husband could get on their feet. 5 years. 5 years I let them live under my roof, paid the utilities, bought the groceries, and never once asked for a single dollar in return. And the night Marcus won $70 million in the lottery, he looked me dead in the eyes and told me to pack my bags.
Let me take you back to where this all started, because none of this makes sense without you understanding who I am and what my life looked like before everything fell apart. My name is Patricia. I'm 63 years old. I lived, I should say, in a 4-bedroom house in Knoxville, Tennessee that my late husband Gerald and I built together from nothing. We bought that land when it was just overgrown grass and red clay dirt. We watched the frame go up, chose every cabinet, every tile, every doorknob. That house wasn't just property. It was 31 years of our marriage. It was where my daughter Leah took her first steps, where Gerald and I danced in the kitchen on Friday nights when we thought nobody was watching. Gerald passed away 6 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden, no warning. One morning he was eating his oatmeal at the kitchen table, and by noon he was gone. I don't have the words for what that kind of loss does to a person. The silence in that house after he died, it was a living thing. It pressed against the walls. It sat in his chair at the dinner table. Leah was devastated too. She was always a daddy's girl. And honestly, having her come around more after Gerald passed gave both of us something to hold on to. Now, Leah met Marcus about 8 years ago at a construction trade show, of all places. She was there for her marketing job. He was there representing the contracting company he worked for. He was charming, I'll give him that. Big smile, firm handshake, call me Miss Patricia. The first time we met like he'd been raised with manners. They dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony in my backyard, under the oak tree Gerald had planted when Leah was born. It was beautiful. I cried the whole time. A year into their marriage, things started getting shaky financially. Marcus lost his job when the contracting company downsized. Leah was working, but her income alone couldn't cover their apartment rent plus their car payments and everything else. They were drowning. So I did what any mother would do. I opened my door. "You two come stay with me," I said. "Save your money. Get back on your feet. This house is too big for just me anyway." Marcus seemed grateful at first. He really did. He shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "Miss Patricia, I promise you, we will not take advantage of your kindness." I believed him. That was 5 years ago. The first year was fine. Marcus picked up some freelance contracting work here and there. Leah kept her job. They helped around the house occasionally, and things felt like a family arrangement that was actually working. But then the second year rolled around, and something shifted. Marcus started becoming comfortable. Too comfortable. He stopped picking up extra jobs. He'd come home from short work day and park himself on my couch, with a bag of chips and the TV remote like he owned the place. He started having his friends over without asking me. Loud friends. Friends who left rings on my coffee table and cigarette butts on my back porch. I mentioned it to Leo once, gently. I said, "Honey, I just want to be respected in my own home." She got defensive immediately. "Mama, Marcus is stressed. He's trying. You don't know how hard things are for him right now." I let it go. That was my first mistake, letting it go. By year 3, Marcus had basically stopped working altogether. He called himself exploring opportunities, which as far as I could tell meant sleeping until 10, scrolling his phone, and occasionally watching YouTube videos about cryptocurrency. Meanwhile, I was still paying every bill in that house. Mortgage, electric, water, internet, groceries, all of it coming out of Gerald's life insurance money and my Social Security checks. My retirement savings were being quietly drained, though I didn't fully see it yet. And the disrespect started creeping in, slow and quiet, the way mold grows behind the walls before you can smell it. Marcus stopped saying thank you, stopped acknowledging me at dinner. When I'd walk into the living room, he'd turn the TV up slightly, like my presence was an interruption. He started making little comments. Nothing explosive, just small cuts. "This house is kind of outdated, don't you think? You know, Miss Patricia, In most families, people don't hover like this. Leah, your mom needs a hobby or something. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself he was just stressed. I told myself Leah loved me, and that was what mattered. But what happened next completely changed everything. One evening, I came home from my book club earlier than expected. I walked through the back door into the kitchen, and I heard Marcus on the phone in the living room. He didn't hear me come in, and I stood there completely frozen listening. He was talking to someone, a friend, I assumed, and he was laughing. And then I heard him say, clear as a bell, "Nah, man, we're still stuck in the old lady's house. But trust me, the second I get my situation right, I am out. I'm not spending the rest of my life in this museum. Place smells like the 1990s. Then laughter. His laughter, filling the house that Gerald built. I stood in that kitchen for a full minute, not moving. My hand was on the counter. I could feel the cool of the tile under my fingers. I thought about saying something. I almost walked in there. Instead, I went quietly upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the wall. That night at dinner, Marcus asked me if there was any more of the pot roast I'd made. I smiled and said yes. And I got up and served him. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I was hoping I'd misheard. Maybe I just wasn't ready to blow up my daughter's life over it. Maybe I was just tired. But I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention that I noticed that Leah and Marcus had stopped talking about getting back on their feet. That language had quietly disappeared. There were no more conversations about saving for a house, or Marcus getting back into contracting, or any kind of forward movement. This was the plan now. Living in my house, indefinitely, was the plan. I also noticed that Marcus had developed a new hobby over the past year or so. Scratch tickets and lottery tickets. He'd buy them a few times a week at the gas station down the road. I'd see the little pile of scratched silver dust on the kitchen counter sometimes and sweep it away without saying anything. Leah once said, "Mama, don't judge him. It's his one thing. His one thing." Okay, Dad, I thought it was a harmless waste of a few dollars. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday night in March. I remember because I've been watching my Tuesday program, a nature documentary I'd gotten into, and I made myself a cup of chamomile tea. It was a quiet, ordinary evening. Marcus and Leah had gone out earlier to run errands. When they came back around 9 p.m., I could hear them in the kitchen. Their voices were elevated, excited. I assumed they'd had a good dinner or something. I didn't think much of it and went to bed around 10. The next morning, I came downstairs, and the energy in the house was different. Strange. Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table, and he had this look on his face I had never seen before, like he was trying to contain something enormous inside his body. Leah was on her phone, pacing. "Morning," I said. "Everything okay?" Marcus looked at me, and for just a second, something flashed across his face. Something I can only describe now, in hindsight, as calculation. "Everything's great, Miss Patricia," he said. "Just great." I made my coffee and went about my morning. But something sat wrong with me all day. By Thursday, I found out why. My neighbor Dorothy, sweet woman, 70 years old, knows everything that happens on our street. Called me that afternoon, breathless. "Patricia," she said, "did you see the news? The lottery winner from Knoxville? They're saying it was someone on our side of town." I hadn't seen the news. I turned it on, and there was Marcus, standing outside a convenience store 2 miles from our house, holding one of those oversized ceremonial checks. $70 million. The Tennessee Powerball. He'd hit on a ticket he bought 4 days earlier. I sat down on the couch. My legs gave out. $70 million. He had known since Tuesday night. He and Leah both knew, and neither of them had said a single word to me. I sat there and I thought, okay, maybe they're still processing. Maybe they'll come home and we'll all sit down and celebrate together. I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. I try to be rational. They came home that evening with a bottle of champagne and flushed, giddy faces. We sat at the dinner table, the same table Gerald and I had eaten at for 30 years, and they told me everything. The ticket, the numbers, the lawyer they'd already called, the lump sum after taxes would be somewhere around $42 million. I hugged my daughter. I told them congratulations. I meant it. I genuinely meant it. And then Marcus set his champagne glass down, folded his hands on the table, and said, "Miss Patricia, I think it's time we talk about some changes." I smiled and nodded, expecting him to say something about how they were going to buy a new house, move out, finally give me my home back, that they were grateful, that they'd never forget what I did for them. Instead, he looked me in the eye and said, "We're going to be renovating this house, updating it. It's going to be our primary residence. So we're going to need you to find somewhere else to go." The room went very quiet. I heard the refrigerator humming. I heard a car pass outside. I said, "Excuse me?" He said it again, calmly, like he was telling me about a weather forecast. "You'll need to find other living arrangements. Miss Patricia, we'll give you 60 days. That's more than fair." I looked at my daughter. Leah was staring at the table. "Leah," my voice came out barely above a whisper. "This is my house." She looked up at me, and her eyes were wet, and she said, so quietly, "Mama, Marcus and I talked about this. We need our own space. We've been cooped up here for so long. We need a fresh start. A fresh start. In my house. I want you to understand something. I was not a crying woman. I had held myself together when my husband died. I had held myself together through every hard thing life had thrown at me for 63 years. I was a strong woman. But sitting at that table, in the house I built with my own 2 hands alongside the man I loved for 31 years, being told to leave by the man I had housed and fed and tolerated for 5 years, I felt something break inside me. Not shatter dramatically, just quietly crack down the middle. I got up from the table. I walked upstairs, and I let myself cry, just for that night, just once. The next few weeks were some of the darkest of my life. I didn't know where to begin. I was 63 years old, on a fixed income, and I was suddenly being told I needed to find a place to live, a place I could afford on Social Security, while my son-in-law sat on $42 million and slept in my house. I called my sister Ruth Ann in Nashville. She was furious. "You get a lawyer, Patricia. Today. That is your house." I called my friend Carol, who'd been my best friend since the 3rd grade. She cried with me on the phone for an hour. But the hardest part wasn't the logistics. The hardest part was Leah. I kept replaying every moment from the last 5 years, trying to find the exact point where my daughter had drifted so far from the woman I raised. Where had I gone wrong? Or had I done everything right and still somehow lost her? I'd lie awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom where I'd slept for 30 years, and I'd think about the little girl who used to crawl into this bed during thunderstorms. The little girl who said her mama was her best friend. That little girl had sat across a dinner table from me and stared at the wood grain while her husband told me to leave. I'm not too proud to tell you. That nearly destroyed me. But here's the thing about grief, and about being a woman who has survived the kinds of losses I have survived. At some point, the grief shifts. It burns down to something smaller and hotter. Something that looked a lot like clarity that I called a real estate attorney named James Whitfield. My neighbor Dorothy had used him years ago and said he was sharp. He drove out to meet me at the house, my house, and we sat at the kitchen table while Marcus was out somewhere and Leah was at work. I laid everything out for him. The deed, the mortgage history, the title, every document I'd kept organized in my filing cabinet for decades because Gerald always said, "Patty, keep your papers right and nobody can ever take anything from you." Gerald was right. He was always right. Mr. Whitfield looked at me over the top of his glasses, and said, "Mrs. Patricia, this property is in your name alone. Your son-in-law has no legal claim to this house, none whatsoever. If he wants you to leave, he'll have to take you to court, and he will lose." I felt the air come back into my lungs. But I didn't stop there, because Mr. Whitfield said something else that lit a fire in me. He said, "Did you ever formalize any kind of living arrangement agreement with them? Document their stay, any contributions, anything in writing?" I said no. It was family. You don't do paperwork for family. He nodded slowly and said, "Then I'd strongly suggest you do that now. And I'd also suggest that if they've been living here for 5 years with no lease and no financial contribution, you may actually have grounds to pursue compensation." I sat with that for a long time. See, I had never wanted money from Leah and Marcus. That was never the point. But the point had changed the second Marcus pointed his finger at me across my own dinner table. I went home that evening, and I sat in Gerald's old armchair by the window, the one I'd never gotten rid of because it still held the shape of him somehow, and I made a list. 5 years of utilities, 5 years of groceries, 5 years of mortgage payments on a 4-bedroom house they'd occupied rent-free. When I added it up conservatively, and I was conservative, it came to just over $94,000. $94,000 that a man worth $42 million had never paid me. I sent Mr. Whitfield the numbers the next morning. Now here's where I need to tell you. I wrestled with this. I genuinely did. Because at the end of the day, Leah was my daughter, and I didn't want to be the kind of woman who went to war with her own child over money. So before I did anything legal, I made one last attempt. I asked Leah to meet me for coffee. Just the two of us. No Marcus. She came. She looked tired, a little ashamed, I think, though she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I reached across that table and I held her hand and I said, "Baby, I need you to hear me. Not as Marcus's wife right now. As my daughter. Do you understand what you're doing to me?" Leah started crying, and for a moment, I thought we were going to find our way back to each other. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and something closed off in her face. She said, "Mama, Marcus says I need to come home. He's talking to the renovation contractors." I let go of her hand. I called Mr. Whitfield that afternoon. The legal notice was served to Marcus on a Wednesday morning. I know because Dorothy called me, barely containing herself, to tell me she'd seen the process server walk up to my front door. The notice was twofold. First, a formal declaration that as the sole property owner, I had not consented to vacate the premises and had no legal obligation to do so. Second, a formal demand letter for $94,000 representing 5 years of unpaid housing, utilities, and living expenses. Now, you might think a man sitting on $42 million would just laugh off $94,000 and pay it to make the problem go away. Marcus was not that kind of man. Marcus was the kind of man whose pride was bigger than his sense. He called me, screaming, actual screaming, language I won't repeat, threatening to make my life miserable, calling me names that I won't dignify by repeating here. I held the phone away from my ear, let him finish, and then I said very calmly, "Marcus, every word of this phone call is being recorded. I'd recommend you contact your attorney." Click. What followed over the next 2 months was a legal process that I will summarize for you, because the details would take another hour. The short version is this. Marcus hired a very expensive lawyer. That lawyer looked at the deed, looked at the documentation, looked at the demand letter, and apparently told Marcus the same thing Mr. Whitfield had told me. You have no case. The house was mine. It had always been mine. It would remain mine. As for the $94,000, Marcus's lawyer tried to negotiate it down, argue it was a gift, claimed there was an implied agreement of free housing. Mr. Whitfield dismantled every argument. We had the utility records. We had the grocery receipts I'd kept. God bless my organized mind. We had 5 years of evidence that I had financially supported 2 adults who contributed nothing. They settled $102,000, slightly above my original ask, because Mr. Whitfield pushed for interest. I want to be clear, it was never about the money. It was never about winning. It was about the principle that you do not treat a person who loved you like a piece of furniture to be moved out when you're done with it. But here's the part one didn't expect. Here's the part that still gives me chills when I think about it. About 3 weeks after the settlement, I got a call from Leah. She was not calling about the legal situation. She was calling because Marcus had done something that I think, deep down, she had been waiting to discover he was capable of. Without consulting her, without even telling her, Marcus had transferred a significant portion of the lottery winnings into a separate account, in his name only. When Leah had gone to their joint financial advisor about setting up a family trust, the advisor had gently flagged an inconsistency. Leah started asking questions. Marcus started getting defensive. Within 6 weeks of winning $70 million, Marcus had quietly started moving money in ways that would have left Leah with far less than her fair share if their marriage ever dissolved. He was already planning his exit from her. The man who had told me that my house was too small, too old, too much me, had been using the same lottery win to quietly prepare to leave my daughter behind too. Leah filed for divorce 4 months after the lottery win. She called me from her car in a parking lot, crying so hard she could barely speak. And I drove to that parking lot, and I sat with her, and I held my girl the way I used to when she was small. And I didn't say I told you so. Not once. Because she didn't need that. She needed her mother. She moved back home 2 weeks later. Not as a dependent. As my daughter, healing that it's been 14 months since that Tuesday night when Marcus won his $70 million and decided my home wasn't good enough for me to live in anymore. A lot has changed. Leah's divorce was finalized. The prenuptial situation was complicated. There wasn't one, which ended up working significantly in her favor. She received her legal share. She's okay. She's more than okay. Actually, she's going to be fine. I see flashes of the woman she was before Marcus, and I hold on to those flashes like they're precious. Marcus, from what I understand, through Dorothy's highly efficient neighborhood intelligence network, bought a large house in a gated community across town and has been working through his winnings with an enthusiasm that concerns at least 2 financial advisors. I don't wish him harm. I don't think about him much at all, honestly. I'm still in my house. I wake up every morning in the bedroom where I slept beside Gerald for 31 years, and I walk downstairs to my kitchen and I make my coffee, and I stand at the window and look at the oak tree in the backyard. The one Gerald planted the day Leah was born. It's a big tree now. It took decades to get there, but it's solid. Its roots go deep. That's the thing nobody tells you about people who try to uproot you. They assume that because you've been still for a long time, you're not holding on. They mistake stillness for weakness. But some of us have roots that go down 30, 40, 50 feet into the earth. And no amount of money, not 70 million, not 170 million, is enough to pull us loose. I learned something through all of this that I want to leave you with. And it's not about karma, though karma certainly did show up right on schedule. It's not even about the legal victory, though I won't pretend that didn't feel good. It's this: know your worth before someone tries to tell you that you have none. I almost let a man who had never built a single thing in his life make me feel like a stranger in the home I built with my own hands and my husband's love. I almost let shame and the desire to keep peace talk me into walking away from everything I'd earned. Don't let anyone do that to you. Not a son-in-law, not a boss, not a friend, not a lover, not a stranger. Don't let the noise of someone else's greed convince you that your value is negotiable. You built something. Don't leave it behind just because someone got comfortable taking up space in it. I'm Patricia. I'm 63 years old. I live in a 4-bedroom house in Knoxville, Tennessee, that I built with the man I loved. And I'm not going anywhere. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever given everything to someone and been made to feel invisible for it, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And leave a comment below. Have you ever been taken for granted by someone you thought you could trust? I read every single one. Subscribe for more stories. New ones every week. I'll see you in the next one.